can start before giving the floor to Thomas, just a short presentation that some of you have already seen or heard because you were in past panels, but I hope that you can see now the slides. Is that the case?
Yeah.
Yes? Great. So let me start now with the official welcome to the 15th IFSAM Congress, the biannual Congress, which this year is in cooperation and connection with EURAM 2020. And it's a very fitting year for this collaboration, given that it's an anniversary year in which IFSAM celebrates its 30 years, and we'll have an online celebration on Tuesday, and EURAM celebrates its 20 years. So there's going to be a party after today's General Assembly and award ceremony. So you are welcome to join the party. This Congress is organized, co-chaired by Sibel Yamak, IFSAM member at large in the executive committee, and EURAM past president and myself. Unfortunately today, Sibel could not join us, maybe later. So a warm welcome on behalf of the two of us. Just a few words about IFSAM. You know, first, as you know, and I already mentioned, this first online IFSAM Congress, as most of the academic associations have this year experience going online. This is devoted to discussing the challenges and opportunities that we see in management research, education, and practice across the world, given the nature of IFSAM, during and hopefully soon after the current pandemic. This is a really, I think, you know, topical issue, very salient, right? It's our realities this day as citizens, educators, researchers, and just as of human beings. IFSAM's current scope, you can see it here. We have currently 13 members, and we hope that soon we'll cover the entire, all the continents. We hope that ANZAM will rejoin with Carrie soon the federation, and we are very happy that in the recent months we have had the French Association for Management, the Italian Association for Management, CIMA, and the returning of the Canadian Association into the federation. The aim for IFSAM is to be the United Nations of Scholarly Associations of Management, to be the body in which the leaders of these different associations from the different continents can get together and discuss issues of interest to the entire community worldwide. And this is today's panel, together with the 3 other panels of this 15th Congress, tries to be an illustration of this. This is actually what the mission of IFSAM in its statutes 30 years ago already established, that the mission is to advance business in general, broadly defined, so not narrowly defined. It includes accounting, finance, operations, HR, strategy, international business, ethics. So we aim to actually welcome all scholarly associations in the different fields or domains of management across the world, right? This is the real focus of the federation. And in order to provide direct benefits to our members, the associations, but also to their individual members, we don't have individual members, it's a federation of associations. The first goal that the founder established is to encourage the establishment of scholarly associations of management. And I think that today probably we should revisit it. And I'm sure that we will be discussing this extensively tomorrow, because the COVID situation has brought significant challenges to our associations. Not only in terms of the adaptation, operational adaptation to online format, but it brings substantial financial challenges, which if this becomes a protracted crisis, might actually impair the financial situation and might be a problem for the survival of some of these associations. So we hope at IFSAM to provide at least a space for reflecting about this, and hopefully for some solutions and ideas to join forces to be able to preserve the richness of the academies across the world. We also aim, as I already mentioned, to promote the linkages and exchanges of information amongst associations through the gatherings of leaders such as today. And another aim which we plan to develop in the next years is the discussion on the standards of competence. What is good management research? What is good management research? What's good management practice? Of course, taking into account context. Context differs in different parts of the world. And today is also an illustration of the international conferences that we aim to organize around important contemporary management challenges, such as the adaptation to COVID in a contextualized perspective. And obviously all this through the development and by developing networks among us. And I'm reminded here of the text that former president of IFSAM, Santiago Garcia Echevarria, wrote to honor the founding president of IFSAM, Urs Halbach, and reminding us about the importance of friendship to lubricate, to facilitate exchanges among persons, among human beings, but also in particular among academics in our field. So just to show you briefly how in the last 30 years, IFSAM has dealt and probably anticipated some of the issues. Already in '92, dealing with high technology in Japan, when Japan was seen as a very important source of competitiveness through technology. In '94, we were fortunate to have a conference with the hands of the Academy of Management on linking scholars worldwide, led by Jan Bayer, who we honor on Tuesday at the IFSAM 30 years anniversary. In '96, in France, discussing intangibles, right after the inception of the resource-based view that Sharon knows a lot about, and that was starting at that time to talk about the importance of knowledge, right? That led to the knowledge-based view and merging with organizational learning literature. In '98, in Spain, dealing with globalization and its impact on management, education, research, and practice with our Spanish colleagues from ASAC. In 2000, in Canada, with ASAC, taking stock about the first 10 years of the Federation. In 2002, dealing again with the global context and prospects for the 21st century. In 2004, dealing with diversity, an issue that has become 16 years later, a grand challenge, a core issue in our world and in our profession, diversity and inclusion along with change. In 2006, responsiveness, that is so salient again in the last 14 years with corporate social responsibility. Thanks to our Chinese colleagues trying to think about the relationship and fusion of East and West management. And in 2010, thanks to the works of Yvon Piqueux and others, linked with the FNES, the National Foundation in France for Management Development, already dealing with the so important issues of justice and sustainability, which have become nowadays at the forefront of the agenda that the civilization, that the world has to deal with. In 2012, with the leadership of Michael Morley as the conference chair, management being reimagined. And not surprisingly, in 2014 in Japan, because of the catastrophe, thinking about management in crisis. Maybe today we are again in a crisis. But the regional reality is also coming to the fore in 2016 in Mexico, with by the hands of the Mexican Association, Acacias, and again in China in 2018. So today, we are again dealing with this challenge, and today's panel is devoted, as you know, to the challenges and opportunities for management practice. Without any further ado, I'll give the floor now to the chair for the session, Thomas Durand, who has, I think, provided us in the introductory video of this EURAM 2020 conference, a very interesting and insightful reflection that I encourage you all to watch. Thomas?
Thank you, Xavier. It is my first time at an event of IFSAM, and thank you for inviting me on board. Our panel is indeed about the challenges and opportunities for management practice in pandemics, and I would add, and after pandemics as well, because we hope that this pandemic is not going to last forever, hopefully. We have a very interesting panel which Xavier set up for us, And I'm very happy that you are all here, and we have some people in the attendance as well. So we'll have an interesting discussion. For the sake of the discussion, I suggest we operate in two steps. Step one, I'll invite each one of the panelists to give a first set of short comments for 5 minutes maximum to essentially focus first on the changes, the main changes and opportunities created by a pandemic, such as the COVID-19, and a second round after this first round, in which you may want to discuss some of the points put on the floor by your colleagues, and you may also want to look at the contributions that management knowledge may bring to help deal with those problems and opportunities at the same time that are generated by a crisis like a pandemic. Let me just start with a simple observation of mine about the natural experiment which COVID-19 created suddenly at the beginning of the year, or at the end of 2019 last year, depending where we sit in the world. I would observe three things. One, the issue of being quick on your feet as a manager to go beyond the astonishment. I mean, astonishment becoming a stone in a way, petrified. Meaning that many people wouldn't even believe it ahead of time. I mean, when we see in Europe, we had Italy ahead of the wave and Spain just after that. And the other countries, including France, where I was sitting, said, well, poor guys there, they're suffering, you know, and we didn't believe in it. I went for the ECC, EURAM Early Career Colloquium in the UK. That was the first week of March. My children asked me whether it was relevant to go there. You know, are you going to go through an airport? Are you going to fly? Are you crazy? And I ignored it, and I went. And that was my last trip, by the way. And then we were hit, and the UK wouldn't believe it either. And they were just behind. So anticipation and not being astonished. Second, management of change. I mean, many leaders in companies explain today that if they had planned to do the change that took place in about a week or 10 days in their organizations, they would have needed about 6 months to a year to accomplish that. Meaning that the way we manage change can be transformed when it makes sense to do it. So there is no long time of unfreezing, etc. Managing change. Third, something which is still coming up. We feel that the work is going to be transformed. Remote work, teleworking is coming up and is already something kind of established in some organizations, but not everywhere. But I would add that young couples with young kids no longer want to live in big urban cities with commuting time, or to live in the cities with no garden whatsoever, because they suffered a lot from the lockdown. This is going to reorganize possibly the way the territories are being used. So a natural experiment which came onto us for the bad, maybe for the good, for part of it. And that was kind of interesting. Now, I turn to each of you. I suggest we follow the same order as the way we used for the presentations, the introduction of each one of you in the panel. So I'm going to turn to Sharon. Would you kindly start and make your first round of comments?
Yes, I have a few slides which I can share or not, whichever you prefer. But I am going to use my slides as a bit of organizing for my thoughts. And one of the things I do want to share is many of my theoretical underpinnings that I'm using today to discuss the COVID situation come from a paper that recently, it's actually just came out in Academy of Management Review between Joe Porak and myself on imagination, indeterminacy, and managerial choice at the limit of knowledge, which is precisely where we are today, right? And so, and it's interesting because we wrote this paper in the middle of the pandemic, but it's actually the introduction for a special issue on fundamental uncertainty, which we had started in 2018. And in 2018, when we started this, fundamental uncertainty still was a little bit radical, and a lot of the economists poo-pooed us that, oh, they've already dealt with this, and their models included this information, and many management scholars said the same. And then COVID descended on the world, and everything that we kind of thought we knew, we don't know anymore. And it really made the special issue timely, and Joe and I had an opportunity to write this paper in the middle of COVID. And so it's interesting because I think what COVID has done in many ways is it's just really changed the game for managers and for organizations and for us as management scholars. And it's made us look at things in very different ways, right? So right now, you know, and especially at the beginning, so we're actually getting our arms around COVID a little bit. But when it started, there was like no news, fake news, no data, missing data, right? Everything we as management scholars don't like, but quite frankly, should be incorporating and teaching and incorporating in our research, because this really is, perhaps to a lesser extent, I mean, this is certainly an extreme case, if you will, but to a lesser extent, these are the challenges that managers face, quite frankly, day in and day out. And I think we have not addressed management challenges the way we probably should be addressing management challenges. And what COVID has done was to expose the cracks. So the cracks that we had in our teaching, our research, and I'll deal with service less, but in our teaching and our research, I think the cracks were there, quite frankly. But COVID came in, and just like, you know, the tide going out, and people who were swimming without swimsuits have now been exposed, if you will. And that's what I believe COVID did. You know, whether business and management scholarship is permanently changed or not, you know, I don't know. I think it's yet to be determined. I suspect that it will be, you know, but I don't know. COVID, I think, accelerated the future in many ways, right? So economics, medicine, politics, again, as I mentioned, have been really exposed. But one of the things I think is also worth looking at, and particularly from our perspective as management scholars in terms of perhaps teaching and research, and I've touched on the research a little bit, but you know, what we used to consider as essential, right? So face-to-face meetings, face-to-face teaching, business travel, even medical regulations, quite frankly. So the vaccine has shown us that medical regulations were maybe not as necessary as we thought they were. These things have been rendered superfluous, right? Superfluous in many ways. And so I'll just kind of close because I know I'm coming in on my few minutes, but you know, technology has accelerated our business solutions. I've been saying, you know, that Zoom in many ways, look at this, Zoom has been the savior in many ways of what's going on. I could not be at today's meeting if I had to rely on face-to-face travel, because we just came off of our Board of Governors meeting and I couldn't have made it in time for this meeting. And yet, because of Zoom, I'm able to be with all of you and meet all of you. This is a huge, huge advantage that I'm not sure we would have thought of as an advantage prior to COVID. Teaching, I think teaching is interesting because I just got through teaching an experiential class on Zoom. And had you asked me, a not newly minted PhD professor, a professor of many years, if I could teach a online experiential class completely on Zoom, had you asked me this a year ago, I would have said, no, it's absolutely impossible. There's no way I can do it. And yet, guess what? Not only did I do it, I was extremely successful at it, which surprised me more than anybody. And I loved it, and my students loved it. And so now I'm thinking, how do I incorporate, even if we have a vaccine, even if we can meet face-to-face, do I need to meet face-to-face with my students the entire semester? Can I pick and choose classes? So that's just one example. And I think universities, and we've been building. I'm not so sure that we need all those buildings anymore. And maybe we need to rethink, where does that money need to go? Perhaps it needs to go back into to scholarship, to more scholarship. I don't know. As a professor, I'd like to see the money go to more scholarship. But I will leave my comments with that. I've probably gone far over my 5 minutes, but thank you very much.
Super. Thank you, Sharon. Africa?
Thank you.
Your mic, Africa, we don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to take the perspective of strategic management. And many of the ideas that I'm going to share with you come from discussions that we at the Strategic Management Department at the ESA Business School have entertained among ourselves, among the faculty members, to figure out how to discuss about these issues with our program participants. So the main challenge that I see that COVID has posed for companies and managers is related to what Sharon just was talking about, is dealing with extreme uncertainty, but doing so in a way that the short-term actions that they take or you take to address the immediate crisis do not compromise the long-term future. I think this is where the critical challenge is. So there are some companies that have been or are on the verge of collapse. And for those companies, well, actually, they cannot deal with this challenge. They just have to ensure survival in whichever way they can, even if that means compromising their medium to long-term prospects. Setting those apart, for our companies, someone was talking about, maybe the risk is that you become astonished, paralyzed. And managers may think, well, I cannot plan for the future. Certainly, you cannot plan for the future, but you can anticipate. You can prepare for the future. And this is what I think managers need to do. To start by developing a point of view of that future at the industry level, and what does that mean for their companies. So is the change that COVID has generated transient, or is it a permanent change? In some cases, it's a temporary, a transient change. And those companies need to take actions to keep revenue. We have all seen how restaurants, hotels, let's stick to restaurants, how they have had to close down, and at the same time, what have they done? Well, they have looked for some other business, some other sources of revenue, and maybe they have started a takeaway business. That is fine, but what companies should not do is to stop investing in their core business, in their main business, because this is what would compromise their future. There is an old article by Pankaj Gemawat and Patricio de Sol. It's a 92 article at the time of that crisis that was called "The Risk of Not Investing in a Recession." And the argument there was that if you stop investing, your resources and capabilities will lose value. And when the crisis is over, you will be in a worse condition, especially if your competitors have kept up with their investments. So at the same time, that new source of revenue, managers need to think whether it's here to stay. So should we keep, once the crisis is over, is this going to stay? Shall we open this new line of business, or is it just to overcome the crisis? In other cases, managers may fear that the crisis and the way it has hit their industry is going to be permanent. So there may be, and there are, changes in consumer behavior, and some of those may open new opportunities. So managers need to think, what will be our customers' needs in a new normal? And to meet those needs, what resources and capabilities will we need? Do we have them? Do we need to look for them somewhere else? Do we need to develop them internally? And an example comes to mind about the hotel industry. And that has been hit really hard, as we all know. We don't know whether that damage will be permanent or will be transient. Most likely, it's not going to go back to the previous levels. One hotel chain, Accor, figured out, well, whatever happens, our customers in the future for sure will be very concerned with health. So we need to make sure that we provide them with the services that they are going to demand. So this hotel chain created a strategic alliance with an insurance group, with AXA, to provide teleservices or health teleservices. And lastly, some other companies may figure that their industry is damaged structurally and that it will not recover. And there, the opportunity is to lead consolidation. And who knows, right? What will happen to the industry, so to speak, of scholarly associations. I think we are in a situation where we know that the industry, the service that we provide to our members has been clearly affected. We are coping with it, but are we coping with it in ways that will not damage our future, or are we actually reacting in a way that's damaging ourselves in the future? There is a big uncertainty, right? Whether we will actually go back and reconvene and meet, or will we combine that with online meetings, or how will we deal with that? So I will leave it here.
Thank you very much, Africa. Pawan Budhwar?
Yeah, thank you. I think so. As we go down the line of presenters, we'll have a lot of repetition of same kind of messages. So I'll try to skip what the earlier presenters have shared, but try to pick up on a few other bits. So I have a long list, so perhaps I'll present them in a form of bullet points, and we can have discussion on them later on. So my kind of comments are based on observations from my own work, based on discussions with the colleagues working in hospitals, from media reports. I edit a journal as an editor, and of course, as a researcher and speaking to people in the industry. So for me, when we look at the three sides, what Thomas has asked us to comment on, the challenges, the changes, and the opportunities. So it's important to ask ourselves, number one, the context in which we are talking about. So if we see India as a context or UK as a context, okay? So since I'm talking and representing Indian Academy of Management, so India was one of the initial countries which went for lockdown, major way, okay? But it didn't work. And that explains it didn't work because the other key stakeholders didn't cooperate. Okay? And it was impossible for them to cooperate because the country is so diverse. Okay? So the first stage is kind of the pandemic. Everyone struggled in the form of sense making. What was happening? Because the information was coming expectedly in a very fragmented manner. Okay? And different kind of agencies giving the information, people were struggling to make sense of that kind of information. Okay? The second kind of bullet point here is the impact in the form of challenges. So we can see the impact on our social lives as an example. Okay? We're social distancing, we're going to work, we're virtual working. It's just phenomenal. The economic impact will continue to unfold. So it's a major challenge where millions and millions of jobs have been lost, where the high street is almost wiped out. Okay? So in the UK, over the last 3 days, we have news of major high street retailers going out of business, and it's not stopping. So the challenges in the form of economic kind of impact. But the other impact which is worth keeping an eye, and we all understand the significance, is on the health and well-being. Okay? So it's a major challenge. So within our own organizations, within our own institutions, we are trying hard to keep everyone engaged. We don't want people to go into silos because people are working from home. And the impact on the health in the form of people experiencing alienation and going into depression and so on. Okay? We also have this major challenge, how to stop things from sliding further. Okay, the example of Africa pointed out about hospitality industry, we can talk about retail industry, we can talk about so many other industries where the slide is so fast. Fortunately, in academic institutions, we are fortunate because the pandemic happened at a time where the technology is more or less developed. It continues to develop, but that has significantly helped us. The other challenge is initially people thought working from home would be wonderful, but it's proving to be extremely challenging. There is no start-stop time, and if you are working in global teams, it's a nightmare. And I have been reflecting as head of the school lately, who pays all these bills? Because in winters, you go to work, the heating is off. Very small example, but all this is multiplying. I don't know how this will unfold. The kind of changes, the second part very quickly, where the pandemic has exposed that majority of the world is underprepared for major crisis. Because of constraints, restraints, we don't have enough resources, and we always are struggling with them. And I'll just talk about readiness of the world in the form of changes, where we don't have expertise. We didn't have the expertise. What we were supposed to learn, the usage of delivery in the next 5-6 years, that we have learned in the last few months. Okay, so it's interesting the changes which have been made. Majority of the organizations don't have resources for these things. They don't have commitment to bring about these changes. The other point which is worth keeping in mind, where organizations have gone into this surveillance mode, whether people are really working, they are sitting on the machines, are they delivering and so on. So we have data which is highlighting so much of software and hardware has been purchased to find out if people are really working, or they switch off the computer or switch on the computer and so on. We can talk about infrastructure which has been created. So in all our academic institutions, if you walk these days, I try to go once in a week to find out what's happening. So the buildings have been kind of marked in a very different way. The cleaning goes on, and the way tables and desks are put for people to come in and so on. So lots of kind of major challenges and changes which are taking place. The last bit on opportunities, when I speak to the kind of well-established organizations, and I work with a large number of software IT companies in India, the Tata Consultancy Company or Infosys and so on. So these guys were already waiting because of the issues with visa of sending people to work in perhaps, let's say, North America, US, and so on. So these guys were already in the mode of delivering everything virtually. And then the developments with artificial intelligence has given them this kind of further kick to create mechanisms or infrastructure to deliver virtually. Okay? So as researchers, we can see, again, if I put on my hat as an editor, there has been so much of research going on. But the challenge here is you can't easily have access. You can't physically go and collect data. That has created this mushrooming of lots of companies where you pay money. And perhaps it's very good. We have Vice President from AOM. At some stage, we have been signing to COPE and many other things. But there are all these companies where scholars are paying money, and what's happening to ethics and so on. So opportunities are there to experiment, to innovate, to improve. But last bit, which goes very close to majority of the learned societies we are representing, it's also an opportunity to revisit, to care more, to empathize, and to support. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Pawan. I now turn to Stefan.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And it was very well pointing at the beginning. We both were going to Huddersfield, to UK, to the early career colloquium, and we so much underestimated what were coming there.
Exactly.
I planned to go to the German annual meeting of the management professors next week. I said I planned, and it changed virtually, of course, because it was no longer responsible to do that meeting. And at the same time, I was working in the last round together with colleagues from the International Labour Organization in Geneva, which has celebrated its 100th anniversary there, to publish a book on the future of work. And sometimes it's good to be a little bit late and behind schedule, because suddenly we found out we are now in the crisis with all our co-authors. And we said, let's make another round of our contributions. And now it will be published next year, at the beginning of next year. And that was, of course, good for the book. So the crisis had really a profound impact, not only of the future of work, but also, of course, of the future of work and how we see our existing practices and how things work. I think the first step which I would recommend to practice, and I talk also a lot towards companies, is to accept that there is a crisis and to really understand it, and not to do like we're going back to normal very fast, or we're in a new normal, or like the World Economic Forum is saying now, the Great Reset, planning very optimistically with a real conference in May next year. We'll see if that works out. But that is something you should do, really accept and understand what the crisis is about. And at its core for me, and it was already mentioned, it's really hitting in the heart of human beings, because it's about social distancing and how we deal with this. And we see quite interesting effects here. I attended in general the World Economic Forum in Davos this year, and there was a lot of talk about climate change and what the young generation is demanding from us and the older generation. And somehow, funnily, the crisis has turned that a little bit around, isn't it? That now the young generation has to behave responsible in order to protect the old generation. Isn't that interesting? And also, it's about reducing opportunistic or egoistic behavior, in terms of that the crisis demands really from us to care for the others. So in total, I'm still quite optimistic. One had said, well, every company has the opportunity to survive the crisis, but definitely not every company or even university will survive the crisis, because of cracks mentioned already by Sharon, which are there and which get more obvious through the crisis, through a kind of burning glass, where you can see that there are problems which are even increased now through the crisis. So I think we need to think very carefully about where the crisis is positioned. It's definitely not a simple problem, it's a complex problem, and what kind of answers it needs. Definitely not simple answers, not simple rules, but really we need to think about new emergent practices needed to experiment with that. And that has also consequences for the way how we teach. That was already discussed yesterday. But just to point here to one important point for me is that we cannot continue to do the way we taught management informed from historic case studies in order to increase and prepare the next generation for dealing successfully with crisis. So it's much more, it's not so much about decision making anymore, it's more about designing good systems, resilient organizations, good systems for crisis management, even a new kind of leadership, where leaders are designers together with others. The new hero for me is the team. It's not the individual leader. And we saw that differences between good and bad leadership very obviously when we go to the political landscape. And another thing is that we can only solve this crisis like others, like the climate crisis, for example, in a global setting. This is why IFSAM is so important and this exchange is so important. And so you need another set of skills in order to make that happen. You need the skills to co-create the future, to understand and appreciate cultural differences, to understand also from which context you are talking for, like Pawan put that. And that needs us to think very deeply and very carefully about changing our programs for the next generation, how we educate them and how we train them. And with that, I leave it for the first round for the purpose of time, and very interesting to listen to the others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Should I call you Lee or Lou?
My first name is Lee. Yeah, you can call me Lee Lu.
Is Lee. Okay, you don't do it the Chinese way. Okay, your first name is Lee. Lee, it's your turn. Thank you. We listen to you.
Okay, sure. May I have my PowerPoint, or should I upload it myself?
Nicola is going to share it with us.
Yes. Okay, I prepared two slides. The one will respond to each different sessions. So I cited Thomas Kuhn's theory to create this conceptual framework to share with all. As you can see, paradigm is very popular terminology for all of us as scientific research. We were in a very stable contexts. For example, education, research, usually it's slowly changed, but not until usually external forces to stimulate us. What is this? Why this happened? How can we deal with it? So all of a sudden, things got changed. My mindset has to be changed. In terms of our topics today, we have to cover adaptation, restructuring, reinventing, and developing resilience. So I use this conceptual framework. I use SARS because SARS is the source to create, the origin source to create COVID-19. And back to 2003, June of 2003, there's another one hit the world. So nothing new, it's just coming back. So repeatedly, how can we reflect on what we had been suffered from the history and what knowledge has been developed and generate? Do we learn anything new? Do we need to create something new? Certainly technology is all being invented. It's not like a history. So I also added WTO because in the world, not just the SARS attack us, the countries, nations also try to protect their own territory and their own people. And the most critical fragile things is the trade among all the nations. So revolutionary process will be kicked in, and then the new paradigm is coming, is emerging, as we all agree. But when and what kind of form? But definitely there will be a new paradigm. The old way we are teaching in the classroom. To share with you, I taught courses in my class over 20 years. I never used PowerPoint, even I got my master's degree in computer science, but I'm firm believer about the blackboard writing and interact with students freely with our thoughts being released. And then because of this pandemic, I have to create a PowerPoint. That is really hard work for me. One course, I have to generate 200 slides. And the list one is 50 plus. So definitely we are going to spend more time to prepare our coursework. And there's some advantage, as Shannon was mentioned. She said she loved to teach online. I was the one reject. I said, how can I teach my subject online? That's impossible. But anyway, the three boxes show us clearly old paradigm and new paradigm and what can trigger this revolutionary process. Usually it's external forces. I list WTO competition now, especially many countries trying to collaborate, also to reject. So this is a very interesting situation. So from our researcher or educator or anybody, businessmen may not have this type of mindset or competence, but we do. So how we interpret the situation we are in, we must have our preconceived knowledge and learn experience from historical events and activities. And through our current experiment and observation, there are complex phenomena and chaotic situations. So we are respond, we are react. Usually we cannot proact. This has got us to rethink what's next. So the researcher, the scholar conduct their research, and even they have their research, as you all mentioned, whether the origin or the leadership agree upon support, that's another challenge. So post-revolutionary policy will become important, whether the hybrid teaching method will be mandate or not. This is my first slides, and I heard the...
Maybe you can use the second one for the second round.
Oh, yes, yeah, sure. Yes,
Okay.
I saved the second one for second round.
Exactly.
Definitely.
And we keep it for you. Thank you very much, Lee. We now turn to Mark.
Thank you. It's always interesting to be the final speaker and to explore what additional might one have to add to contribute to the conversation. I appreciate everything that everybody has said so far, and I want to actually go back to all the way to Thomas's introduction, the idea that this has been a natural experiment, and I think it genuinely has, and it's interesting in that what this situation has allowed is actually, I think, some fundamental testing of management theories and management models and the degree to which they actually hold up when things really matter. And I really like Sharon's comment in terms of, what this situation has done is to expose the cracks that were already there, that have been, and what we have to ask is, well, why were the cracks already there? And why were those cracks not visible? What was being done to gloss over them? What was being done to be able to fill them in and manage the spaces in between them? And they just mentioned the idea of that reactive versus proactive. And this is where, in my preparation for this, I did a couple of things. One, recognizing this is about management practice, was to spend a lot of time reading. So what's the actual practical advice that managers and executives are being given? If we actually look at the more practitioner-oriented journals, the Harvard Business Reviews and the Ivy Management Journals and INSEAD and Strategy and Business, what are they providing as practical advice to managers in terms of how to be able to manage the pandemic? And what was interesting is there are a number of themes that actually bubble up to the surface. And one of them that I do struggle with is the idea that this was unseen and unanticipated, because it wasn't. And we look at, it's made the argument, well, nobody, there's very little memory of what happened in terms of the Spanish flu of 1918, and that there may not be living memory, but as Lee just pointed out, we have SARS, and that was only in 2003. And while the death toll was much more manageable, it was about 8,000 rather than the significant numbers that we're looking at right now, it can be argued that we were just lucky then. And what we're seeing now is the natural consequences of that. But what I marvel at around that was Canada in 2014, actually in their public health agency, went through a disaster planning scenario specifically around this kind of pandemic. The National Health Service in the UK, their #1 risk in terms of their enterprise risk plan was a coronavirus-based pandemic. The Obama administration in the United States built and left for the subsequent administration a pandemic preparedness plan. Like, we understood the risks of this. And what I marvel at, in the New York Times, shortly after the pandemic, really started to take toll. And when New York was going through its significant first wave, there was a fire chief in Brooklyn that had, in his district, just been aware of the outbreak of a pandemic starting in China, and very quietly started stockpiling personal protective equipment to deal with the potential consequences of that. So do organizational leaders not have the ability to be able to prepare? I fundamentally challenge that. But it's a question of preparedness beyond the usual suspects and being aware on a broader scale. And we talked about, Stefan talked about that idea of sense making, being able to understand beyond immediately what's under our nose, what the potential influences and forces that are emerging are, and the potential for them to be able to have an impact. But what's really interesting is when we actually look at the practical guidance that's being provided, it really kind of summarizes down to 3 themes. One of them, as Lee just talked about, is the idea of resilience. And the challenge is we need to be able to test what resilience actually means. We need to be able to challenge what resilience actually means, because to a certain extent, people speak to it as some sort of magical intestinal fortitude. And it's not about that. It's about actually having the capacity and depth of resources and equipment and people and imagination to be able to deal with beyond the immediate known. And so when organizations get told. They need to be more resilient. It's about actually building a level of awareness. It's being able to scan for potential risks, and it's being able to have the depth of resources in place to be able to deal with those. And that the challenge is that's actually contrary to the next category of advice that organizations are being provided, which is they need to be lean and they need to be agile. And frankly, those are two competing forces. And they're used to, going back to Sharon's comments about covering up the cracks, actually, I think they're used to apologize for some of our worst tendencies, because lean tends to be used as an excuse to, I need to be able to do more with less. And agile, rather than being nimble and responsive and being able to adapt to changing circumstances, can also just be an excuse for changing your mind on a daily basis. And so it's about how do we actually practically work and exercise with enough of a depth of resources to actually have the capacity to be able to deal with the challenges that we're facing, which when we actually try to run lean, try to run with minimal possible set of resources, and then are inconsistent in the decision-making alignment around how we use those resources, is, I think, where the cracks start to show up, because people just simply do not have the capacity to be able to deal with everything that's going on. And then layering on that the challenges of a circumstance like this. And that comes to sort of the last thing that I see in terms of practical guidance that I think is really challenging from a practical sense, which is the need to be able to collaborate more and to be able to make more effective collaborative decisions. And this orbits fairly strongly in some of the research that I've done, because what we know is that we have a problem of making decisions in groups. Groups make very bad decisions most of the time, rather than actually leveraging the diversity of insight and experience and understanding and background. We tend to go for the lowest common denominator and find what we can agree on as quickly and simply as possible and be able to move on. And they're very uncomfortable about making decisions under uncertainty. And so the tendency tends to be either to wait or to be able to default with the simplest answer that everybody can accept and hope for the best. I think we're going to really make better decisions. We need to be able to expand our sense making. We need to be able to expand our perspectives. We need to be able to expand our willing to be able to live with the complexity and uncertainty of the moment in order to be able to make better decisions that actually allow for us to be able to fill in some of the cracks that Sharon spoke to. And with that, I'll wrap up my thoughts.
Thank you. Very, very useful. For the sake of time, I'm going to ask all the members of the audience, if they want to ask questions, they can use the chat. And I'm going to ask Xavier, our co-chair of this IFSAM Congress, to look at the chat, because in real time it will be a bit hard for me to do both, and to see what you can put to the panelists in terms of the questions you identify on the chat. And for the sake of time, also, I will ask all the panelists to shorten the comments of the second round and start addressing some of the points made by your colleagues on the panel, if you want to. And in the middle of that, Xavier, you feel free to intervene and insert some questions coming from the audience. Is that okay? Okay, I suggest we go around the other way around this time. So Mark, if you, well, you just spoke, depending whether you're ready to say other things, or you don't have to, No,
it's, I can briefly speak from, so what does that offer from it for how academia can help to prepare?
Well, that's interesting. We listen to you carefully on that.
Well, and so I'm actually going to echo the themes that I spoke to also in reverse, because I think the fundamental challenge that we have is still about how we make decisions and about how decision making works. We understand behavioral decision making. We understand bounded rationality. We understand that we are not rational decision makers, and we do not engage in rational choice, despite what the economists would like to believe. And the challenge there then is we need to be able to genuinely provide guidance to be able to test and challenge the biases that we naturally bring to the table and the short-circuiting of conversation that might actually occur. And what I want to highlight within there, I run a number of executive education programs. And one of those, I use a decision-making case called the Carter Racing case, which is largely based upon the decision to actually launch the Space Shuttle Challenger and the disaster that occurred back in 1986 now. And what's fascinating about it is that there's two stages to it. One, an individual choice is made, do you race or not? And the second is a group choice is made. I have facilitated this dozens of times, thousands of people, hundreds of groups. On average, 20 to 25% of individual decision makers will not race because of the safety issues associated with the decision and the unwillingness to be able to put the driver at risk. About 75% say race because racing is risky and we just need to be able to do it. In a group context, I've had 2 groups ever that have made the decision not to race. Once the group is asked the question, the answer that comes back is always yes. And that highlights a fundamental challenge around how we actually educate people to be able to make decisions in groups, because we go for the safe, lowest common denominator decision, not the practical values-based correct decision. I'll conclude there.
Thank you. Lee, you can respond to the other panelists or make your second point with your slide, depending what you want.
Yes, I would like to show my slide and then respond the questions. Yes.
Nicolas?
Can I have the second? Yeah, it will be very fast. Oh, before, while we are waiting, the conceptual framework you're going to see has 5 different parts. I cited from Kurt Lewin's action research and minority study back to 1946. He was talking about because contextual challenges, so the normal science research method may not work for social science. And also Herbert Simon proposed bounded rationality. This is back to a decision-making process. So I would like to share with you the action research, identify problems, gathering data, analyze, interpret data, and then collectively with your clients to design the intervention change plan to implement and then evaluate results. This is not end of it. So every step you can have iterative, reflective, collaborative process. So until certain point, the researcher has the academic freedom and has the knowledge or competence per se, so they can start the next phase. This is what I want to share with you, and this is also subjectively, I think this will be a research method which is already popular, being used in social science to cope what we are in now. Okay, I'm finished my part.
Thank you. We now turn to Stefan.
Thank you, Lou, for pointing to action research. I think it's very valid in this situation. We want to improve and develop emerging practices and action. Thank you also to Mark. I think the point criticizing lean and agile management approaches is also very relevant here. I would call that we have to go too far in regard to optimization of efficiency with our theories, and look at our theories, especially when they are applied to the health industry. It's especially critical because it's a question of life and death, but also to our organization. So scaling efficiency was really successful in the past in the industrial age. But I think we have kept too long with this approach now in this very complex and uncertain times. So we have to refocus here our knowledge in regard to resilience, really understand resilience. Learning is, I think, another very important part, because we may have not the decisions right at hand, the good decisions, and also sustainability and collaboration, as we can solve this only together. I think that would be the first point where we have to change something. And collaboration brings me to the next point, to our leadership approaches. I think we really have to deal with the question, what is a good leadership approach in that times? And I mentioned before, it's definitely not the solution of the individual leader, and it's definitely not the solution of waiting for his or her answer, but really empower others. Diversity is one of the most important drivers of digital transformation, what we see in our research. So it's not the technology, but it's a cultural dimension. And it's also in regard of the question, how do we empower others? Maybe by having not the answer, but putting the good, powerful questions into the community, and then waiting what is coming up. A third point, I think we have also to take Corona as a driver for putting up completely new topics in management research. We have discussed that a little bit also yesterday and the day before, as we see that there's also, it's not only about decisions and leadership, but it's also about, do the people trust in leaders? So it's about legitimization. And the issues of trust, fairness, not only in regard to customers, but also employees, and a good strategic communication of decisions so that they get accepted, is something we should focus much more on than we have in the past. There are good approaches which focus on that, like the RRBM initiative of NSU, the ASPM Institute, or a couple of UN initiatives on responsible leadership, which I would like to highlight here. But there is much more to be done, and I'm really looking forward to follow more on this new kind of research agenda for our area of management. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Before I turn to Pawan, Xavier, would you kindly mention the questions possibly coming from the audience?
Sure. So far, there are 2 questions. Before that, I would like just to welcome 2 other participants who have entered the session. A while ago, Professor Takashi Sakikawa, who is the Director for International Academic Relations of the Japanese Association of Business Administration, and also welcome an IFSAM Council member representing Java, and again, David Zuga, the President of the Africa Academy of Management, who is again joining us. Thank you so much to both for being with us. So the 2 questions, I think I would first mention Alketa's question, which refers to the evidence that the preparedness, so-called preparedness plans for the pandemic have put, I guess, have made evident that there are 2 challenges. One, let's say, that might seem more operational, which is coordination about different actors. I would say even more than coordination, the different roles of the different societal actors, and how corporations have also taken an expected role, much in line with recent cross-sectoral partnership that we see. But so how to deal with this coordination issue? And second, the evident embeddedness, again, I guess, made again evident of business in society, and how business depends on somewhat of a, let's say, stable and quote unquote rational political system, and the fact that different political systems seem not to be providing that stability or that rationality. And so these two issues she is raising, I guess, that's the two questions that Alketa raises. And another very interesting question by David, which is, what are the features that you believe that will become permanent, using the language that Africa use, right? Which of those features will become permanent in our life, in research and teaching in management? Thank you.
Thanks. So, Pawan, you may start giving your answers to that if you wish so, or make other comments, but the other panelists after you may answer the questions as well.
Yeah, sure. So the second question first, which I believe majority of us believe that life will not go back to what it used to be normal. So the new normal is evolving, and certainly it will be a mix of blended learning. What we have experimented and in a way found useful, where it helps to reduce cost and efficiency and increases flexibility and so on. So that will be my one kind of response to what we expect. I'm comfortable in commenting on that one. The second one, I'll link it with my presentation where we understand unless different stakeholders come together and work as a real team, as a really integrated team, which is happening with policymakers. They can be from the government or from the health sector or policy and so on. Unless they fully work as a true team, the real benefit doesn't come. So my second bit and few observations very quickly, where Thomas, you asked us about the contributions that management knowledge can make. So here for a while, we have been talking about the usefulness of cross-disciplinary research. Okay? So now is an opportunity, going back to, we have these challenges of bringing all these different stakeholders together, work as a team. So the expectation from what has happened with COVID-19, how organizations react, everyone is reacting very differently. How they respond, everyone seems to be responding very differently. How we return, which means go back to work. Again, organizations are doing things differently. And the last one is how we transform businesses for future. Okay, so again, as researchers, if we go across boundaries, which many of us do, but this time not staying within the domain of business and management and so on, but perhaps going to life and health sciences, perhaps going to engineering, perhaps going to ergonomics and so on, and picking up things from there, then we can address in a more meaningful manner how we react, how we respond, how we return, and how we transform. The other thing which management researchers, along with other researchers, can highlight, which is already highlighted but confirm, lots of facts, which goes back to the second question. So the facts are remote work is real now, and it is big. And look at the impact on city centers is going to have. Okay, where the property prices in the rural areas is increasing, city centers are in a way in danger of dying. Okay, so that's a fact. Okay, I talked about mental health. Okay, it's a fact. The way things are affected, organizations, universities are working very hard to address this. Okay, if we bring in the other developments along with COVID, which have happened, Black Lives Matter, BAME in the UK, where the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, we don't forget these developments as well, because they are also creating challenges and opportunities. So I think so, and the leadership which Stefan was talking is challenged. We are talking more and more about being compassionate, maybe moving more towards servant leadership, maybe challenging on the ethical leadership and so on. So all those things are becoming important, but the last bit here is how we quickly adopt the availability of technology and how we quickly advance with it, because it's not only few key decision makers advancing with it, but we are expecting all others as well in the supply chain, for example, how quickly they advance and adopt these technologies. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Pawan. Africa?
Thank you. So I guess I will be somehow mixing comments to the questions as well as my own comments. They will be mixed.
Please do.
So, okay, I think it's one thing that's happening already. It's related to what Sharon said. It's that we are going back to essentials. We're getting rid of superfluous things. And I think that at the organizational level goes to, okay, what are our resources and capabilities, and what can we build from those? And going back to my earlier comment of what will we need to be able to compete in the future. So that brings me to the research on resource orchestration, and to think about new ways of using our resources, and also, of course, to research, which is my area of specialization, to research on strategic alliances as a way to get access to new resources that allow us to do new things. And we have already talked about research on organizational resilience, and I will not go into that, but obviously this is very, very relevant. To the issue of coordination. On the one hand, external coordination across actors, and we have seen examples of extreme hasty coordination. The alliance between Pfizer and BioNTech, they started it without having finished and finalized important details of contracts. So all of the financial conditions and financial terms had not been decided and finalized when they already started working together. What makes this possible? This is also, this opens opportunities for research. Under what conditions can you really get started working without having gone through such important issues? What are the governance mechanisms that can be put in place as opposed to only formal contracts? This is speaking about coordination at the higher level, of course, also coordination at the operational level. How are companies capable of putting together their routines and their resources in such a short period of time? And thinking about internal coordination, what comes to mind is an area in which I'm not expert at all. Actually, I'm quite, I don't know much about it, but it seems to me that research on organizational improvisation may be relevant. So I was intrigued by this and looked at some early work by Carl Weick, and he talks about organizational improvisation as just-in-time strategy. And he says that that's a blend of strategy formulation and implementation, that people just have to keep going and formulating the strategy and putting it into practice at the same time. And he also said it's a meeting point of planning and opportunity. So I'm quite intrigued by that, and also going to some early work by Carl Weick on this. Actually, this is from his Organization Science 98 Introduction to Specialization and Improvisation. He talks about the capabilities that groups, teams need to have in mind to be able to improvise. Being open to reassembly of and departures from routines. Forget about what we were doing, what do we need to do right now? Being predisposed to recognize partial relevance of previous experience to present novelty. Skillful paying attention to performance of others and building on it in order to keep the interaction going and to set up interesting possibilities for one another. This clearly speaks to spontaneous coordination. Focus on coordination here and now and not distracted by memories or anticipation. So I think that this body of research may bring some light to companies. Interestingly, improvisation is not, of course, it's not always a good thing, because you need companies and organizations to be reliable and that you can foresee what they are going to do, also for internal coordination. But in a situation where the landscape has changed so dramatically and fast, well, maybe we need to improvise some things. That's it.
Thank you, Africa. Very nice. Xavier, I understand you have more questions before I turn to Sharon. So maybe she will be able to start answering, and then some other panelists might as well. Xavier?
Yes. So I guess I'll read them as they come into the chat. So Takashi asks whether job security, generous benefits, and other traditional management practices have gone. Then Carrie.
COVID kills the welfare.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. And then Carrie says the role of evidence-based research is shown up in sharp relief, seemingly dependent on country context. In some countries, leadership and consequent policy prescriptions have worked hand in hand with experts, and others have relied on politically based decision-making. What conditions make evidence-based research possible? That's Carrie's question. And then Mark, building on Carrie's, kind of seconds that question, I guess. Right? Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Sharon, do you want to give it a try and make your own comments for a second one as well?
Yes, thank you. Actually, I'm kind of glad that we're running out of time, because I'm going to be very provocative, and then I'm going to kind of get out of the Zoom, right? And so, so basically, you know, change does not come easy, and it doesn't really come easy to us as management researchers either. So I'm going to argue that many of the tools that we were using under stable conditions, so tools of rationality, which people tend to accept quite a bit, but even bounded rationality, right? So go back and read bounded rationality. And these tools were wonderful when we were more stable context. But bounded rationality actually assumes that managers have a lot of limits, are cognitively limited. So go back and look at that. And I'm going to argue that fundamental uncertainty and the indeterminacy that we're in generate decision contexts with unique demands that require unique concepts and theories, right? So in these contexts, managerial choice has to be reconceptualized, and it's inherently constructive and imaginative. I haven't heard imagination used all that much in our conversation today. Mark, you used it, and I was like, good for you. And we're at the limits of our managerial knowledge today. And so that's why, you know, you can't look at the dots, right, that were past, because connecting dots means you look on the past and on history. And I'm going to say that managers are going to have to look forward, right? We need to, choice is going to originate in the managerial mind. And how are we going to help managers think about that? And I heard Lee say something that we need to think more about, maybe design thinking. And I agree with that on some levels, but not actually the way design thinking has evolved. Let's go back. There's a wonderful paper by a woman named Darkey, published in 1978. And I would encourage all of you to go back and read that. And I'm going to actually read a little excerpt from that in a second, just a couple of comments. But I really want to push on this notion of managers are smart individuals. They are not cognitively limited. In fact, they can imagine, and they have lots of tools, personal tools at their hand that I think we as management scholars have missed. And we as management scholars need to think about managers not as just reacting to their environments, but actually shaping and creating their environments. And that's where I think we are falling short as scholars. So a couple of things that I think, you know, we might want to think about, and I'll close in just a second, but you know, we're moving, and we heard this in terms of like flexibility and lean manufacturing and all these things. You know, we're kind of moving from this world in which volume-based, right? And let's talk about our values, by the way, right? So volume-based values of efficiency necessarily aren't working right now very well for us in this context. And so maybe what we need to have is value-based and effective, you know, effective values, right? As opposed to efficiency. Maybe we need to be more effective. And I'm going to read this tiny little piece from it's Jane Dark, and she published in 1979. And when I was reading this article, I found it absolutely fascinating. But basically she says the limits of the problem-solving approach are that search will miss the primary generators of action. And I found that fascinating. And what she says is that values, purpose, new knowledge creation, skills of experimentation, flexibility, interviewing, generating, right? Being imaginative, generating things, iteration and capitalizing, maybe even celebrating our biases. We've been treating biases, human biases, as if there's something wrong with them. Maybe we actually, as human beings, know more than anybody's giving us credit for, right? These are things that are likely to generate new possibilities. And so I think with that, I'm going to leave it. But I think we as management educators have to embrace this change and have to look at it and say, where is it making our management theories and our management approaches? Where were the cracks in that have been exposed? And how can we be better in the future at training and teaching our managers? I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. In a way, you supported Lee's point about a change in paradigm perceived by you, and this would affect us, and we would have to rethink the way we envisage our contribution in management theory and concepts. Okay. Takashi, I will try a quick answer, a very short answer to your question. I don't think we observe the end of the safety nets in the welfare societies we have. In fact, what I see, especially in my country, but not just in France, we see public debt exploding, and we see a lot of transfers to the less favored in society, so that jobs will be saved. And as a result, the transfer from the public debt goes to savings, because people in uncertainty tend to save a lot. So it's a very weird macro phenomenon by which the welfare system is at work, but doesn't help the economy, because the money transferred from the debt of the state goes to mostly into saving. I'll stop here on that. Okay, now all the panelists can intervene whenever they want, and if you have more questions, Xavier, you tell us. Mark, I see your hand up. Yes, Mark.
No, I want to build on that. I want to build on Takashi's question, because I think there is a really interesting juxtaposition and tension that we're dealing with, because when we actually deal with how our managers making decisions, how our organizations making decisions, and particularly right now, we are seeing a lot of decisions being made about, quote, cost management and making, quote, difficult cost management decisions that are in essence code for, we are laying people off. We are reducing their hours. We are moving people from permanent to contract or permanent to part-time. And at the same time, I look at Pawan's excellent comments around, where we are occasionally seeing effective leadership is in terms of making effective values-based decisions and valuing human beings and valuing the contribution that individuals provide. And I think there is, frankly, a significant gulf right now between the degree to which business's job is to protect its bottom line at the expense of people versus business's job is to look after people and protect the overall of society. And I think that there is a broad gulf between those 2 points.
So anyway, so thank you, Mark. Okay, so right now, can you hear me? Anyway, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Please,
anyway,
please.
so right now, I'm studying how much change Japanese and foreign company they experience in terms of job security and benefit and teamwork practice. That's why I would just have asked a question to panelists. Okay. So I'm just studying how much change company around the world they experience in terms of job security and training, the benefit and other traditional management. I have asked a question to panelists.
Thank you. Some more comments?
But
Yes, Pawan?
sorry, Thomas, but if you have to leave at 3:40,
Yeah, it's 5 minutes.
the 3 minutes in my clock. I just want you to have enough time to say your closing words before you leave for the General Assembly, and then I will have to say mine as co-chair and to announce the next panel.
Okay, let's go to Pawan.
Sorry.
I say a word, and then you take over. Pawan?
Thank you.
Thank you. So first observation on Takashi's question. So if we look into the UK context, where the Chancellor has been pushing and borrowing to support the furlough scheme. And he has gone to the extent now it has been extended up to March 21. Okay, so that's mainly to save and support people who are going out of job and involving companies. So it's an interesting model where the government is putting in lots of money, but also the companies are supposed to put 10 to 20% depending on who they are. But if we look at the Indian kind of context, where there is this strong emergence of the third sector, okay, which has less to do with the government and so on. So lots of huge organizations, including individuals in the form of third sector, they are coming forward and they are giving millions and millions of, in this case, rupees, we can convert them towards our currency, to support people whosoever is needing that kind of support. The second question on the evidence-based kind of decision-making and research, we know for a while it has been there. But again, if I see the Indian kind of context where perhaps the availability of what evidence we can use is also so fragmented, and that applies to lots of emerging markets. But also the whole orientation, and this time we bring in the political kind of involvement, how the government uses that kind of data and so on. So the robustness of availability of data becomes critical, and based on that, depending on where we are, we can utilize that. And of course, we know the benefits of pursuing that.
Thank you. We need to have Nicola take a picture, if it's okay for you to allow that your a picture of you will appear if this is sent on the social media. If anybody disagrees, just tell it now. Otherwise, a picture is going to be taken. Smile. Nicola, it's your role. Okay, I have to rush to attend the General Assembly and the award ceremony of EURAM. So I'm going to leave you here. You're in good hands with Xavier concluding the panel. I really enjoyed it, and I'm impressed by the variety of points of view we have, we collected. And I'm very interested and intrigued to see how the summary will be prepared, because with so many inputs, I wonder how that will be done. For sure, it's taped, hence there will be the possibility of looking back at what was said, but it's not going to be simple. Good luck to Michael, because you're the one in charge.
17 pages and still writing, so this is why I had my camera off. I felt under a lot of pressure, actually. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Thomas.
Bye-bye.
I'll see you in a few minutes in the General Assembly.
Yeah.
So just to close this panel, first of all, I'm very happy. I'm very happy that this took place, that we are all here in good health. That makes me really happy. And I think that we have been indeed listening and sharing some very interesting points. I would like just to share three observations, listening to all of you. First one, I think that in the discussion, there was a lot of points mentioned regarding the challenges that managers, corporations will face. A different thing is how we, in research and in our teaching, characterize managers. And I think that Sharon was alluding to this. And while I would tend to agree with her that indeed, as Porter already in '96 in his HBR, when talking about what is strategy, he said there's been too much focus on operational efficiency and operational performance. I'm reminded here of an even earlier reference than the one that Sharon referred to, which is Edith Penrose's '59 book on the theory of the growth of the firm. Penrose had a very creative cognition of managers. She saw managers seeing new services in the resources that the firm already had. So creativity, so how those resources could be used to serve new needs, what she called a productive opportunity. And I think that this also links to what Africa said about the importance for managers to realize what resources they have, but also what new services, as she would say, they can obtain from those resources that now there are, as Mark said, in so much need. There is so little slack because that obsession with no waste. And finally, how can we serve? How can we help those managers in these challenges? And this is actually what we discussed in the presidential activities of EURAM this year. And I send you the summary for that. So there, I think there are some ideas for both us as individual academics, but also for our schools, our university presidents or provosts, and our associations. And I link it now with the final point, which is, as you know, the last panel of this 15th Congress will be tomorrow, and it will be devoted to the challenges we face as learned scholarly associations in this environment. So we'll have a panel of, I'm very happy to say, 5 female leaders, 5 presidents or incoming presidents, and one male president. And they will be chaired by the new president of the European Institute for the Advancement of Studies in Management, Geraldine Doyle. So I think that IFSAM is doing pretty well, at least in terms of sex equality or even more. So thank you again to all of you, and I'm really looking forward to the last panel tomorrow. I really encourage, if you can, to join us, even though you're not a panelist, but you're all welcome, particularly the IFSAM Council members and the representatives from the associations. I'll see you then, hopefully soon, and have a rest and happy holidays to all. Namaste.
Thanks, colleagues. Thanks very much.